Deltarune has a problem. New chapters take a long time to release. So long, in fact, that fans have taken it upon themselves to develop what they believe to be the next logical continuation for the base story. Some stay true to Toby Fox's design philosophy, while others venture more towards fan OC territory, with very little connection to the chapters released at the time. So instead of going over all the fanfics, animations, and theories of what the next installment of Deltarune could have been, let's just cut to the chase, to arguably the best part about any Deltarune fan game. That's right, say it with me folks, it's the boss fights. Who wants to read walls of text when you can be out there dodging bullets and fighting foes? Seriously, how disappointing would Deltarune be if there wasn't at least one insane boss fight? And speaking of anticlimactic, one of the most hyped predictions for Deltarune's next antagonist was this little TV dude, but he didn't exactly show up the way fans expected. If you haven't guessed it already, I'm talking about Mike. But wait, I hear you say, wasn't Mike a joke character that served no purpose other than being referenced by Tenor? Well yeah, but keep in mind, this was before anything major about Chapter 3 released, and all fans had to go off were a few offhand references by previous enemies, such as Spamton, a TV, and a few reoccurring smiling faces. It doesn't sound like much, but fans were already used to Toby's antics of planting Easter eggs, which would reveal major details about his next project. All of these theories, however, were gently pummeled to death by Toby. Not once, but like 5 times throughout Chapter 3. But let's take a step back to a more simpler time, before the 2025 release and all the cowboy furry shenanigans, to look at by far the most popular interpretation of Mike. The speculation began in September 2021, right as Chapter 2 ended, with Chris opening a dark fountain. And wait, is that a TV smiling? Yeah, this next chapter was obviously going to take place in a TV world, with nobody else but a sentient TV being the main antagonist. But the biggest question was, who exactly was the CRT villain? The most obvious conclusion to draw was connecting the aforementioned Mike to the ominous television face from the end of Chapter 2. Shortly after this connection was made, various fan designs started popping up, most featuring the same toothy grin from the teaser, a TV head, and a suit, which I'm sure you've seen before, along with an alternative design with a giant toothy grin and antennae connected to 2 eyeballs with a pretty strong resemblance to the friend PNG that flashes when you're in the Queen's basement. Naturally, the next continuation from concept artwork is fully fledged playable fan games, and trust me when I say they do not disappoint. One of the best early interpretations of a playable Mike boss fight from this era was created by Sad Bread on Game Jolt. When I played it myself, I personally expected this to be a really janky fight, but for a Scratch project, yes you heard that right, a Scratch game, it felt pretty faithful to the Deltarune engine, give or take some minor details. All of his attacks felt fair and creative, with the TV channel intermission especially being a great way to break up the monotony of dodging and acting, reminding me of something you'd see in the Photoshop Flowey boss fight. Anyways, it's good to touch back on an old relic from the past, from before the friend inside me theory infected the brains of every Deltarune fan, and of course before any possibilities of Mike being a TV were bluntly put to rest by the Spamton sweepstakes event in 2022. Still, it's fun to look back and see just how far off the mark we really were. If you thought that was the last time fans got carried away and ended up disappointed, you'd be so wrong. In fact, these misled predictions would set the stage for even more letdowns in future fan theories. Case in point, Ram from Chapter 3. I'm sure most of you while playing were just waiting for the moment we'd end up fighting Ram as the secret boss for the chapter. I mean, he checked all the boxes. Freedom theme? Check. Being a shopkeeper? Check. And last but not least, his really strange behavior, especially in the back room, which gives him that secret boss aura we've gotten from previous encounters. By strange behavior, I don't just mean weird one-liners and his awareness for the type of object he is. I'm talking more about his deep relationship with Chris, a dynamic that parallels Spamton's, something we don't see in random non-important objects. The more closely you look into this, the more it seemed like the perfect setup for a secret boss encounter that never came to fruition. Before anyone brings it up, no, the WereRamb console fight is not the elusive Ram superboss fans wanted. And there's nothing even confirming both the entity and Ram even are related. In fact, most fans acknowledge the entity as being a sentient version of the Shadow Mantle, with all of the secret backstage dialogues you'd only get if you S-rank Tennor's boards, and the unique personality we got from this one shopkeeper. For all of that to amount to nothing felt more than just disappointing. It was a huge missed opportunity. As you'd expect, fans were disappointed at how dirty Ram had been done in the chapter. I mean, he didn't even get a proper shop menu or portrait, making fans determined to take it upon themselves to create their own interpretations of a supposed Ram superboss. This brings me to one of the most popular Ram secret boss fan games, WereRamb. And I just gotta get this out the way, but this fan game was a 2 out of 10. There's so many things wrong with it, and I understand it was made in a day for a YouTube video, but you could still easily quicken the soul speed and make it less nightmarish to fight. In theory, it's decently designed, taking the idea of werewires from chapter 2 and applying it to Ram, as both these guys are outlets. Furthermore, the twist of us, the player, saving Ram from being petrified, for him to only become a monstrous entity we need to defeat to get the Shadow Mantle, feels so close to Tubby's writing, and makes me wonder why we never got something like this for the sake of pacing. Speaking of pacing, this fan-created boss fight definitely knows how to handle that. If you like really long, difficult boss fights, that is. The mod Deltarune Chaser is a chapter 1 era boss fight, and if you remember what I said about some fan creations leaning more to OC territory, then you'd notice the prime example of that. Originally released in October 2020, as stated on the game drop page, the boss fight takes place following the events of Deltarune Chapter 1, as Chris and Susie return to the Dark World to confront the source of the impending darkness. Whatever that's supposed to mean. The main takeaway is that this is a completely original character boss fight, serving as a continuation from Chapter 1. Whether it's meant to be directly after, sort of like a Roaring Knight situation, being an actual final boss fight, or was meant to be an interpretation of a final Chapter 2 boss fight is unclear. But what is clear, however, is that this mod is incredibly long, and undebatably the hardest boss fight in this entire video. To give you the rundown, as soon as you play the game, you're dropped off right in the confrontation leading up to the boss fight. A few tidbits of dialogue later, you're in for a time of your life, dodging incredibly spammy Roaring Knight level attacks, and would you look at that, your entire team is nearly dead because we're using Chapter 1 HP bars. The mod creator really was not lying when they said this would be around level difficulty, perhaps harder, and honestly it makes fights like Tenor or Queen seem like an absolute breeze. Not much else can be said for the actual gameplay aspect, apart from how repetitive it gets if you aren't attacking every turn, or using special attacks such as Rude Buster or Team Buster. When I was playing, I was constantly in a state of limbo, deciding whether or not it was worth it to risk it with a big attack to potentially get owned by a stupid Roaring Knight-esque attack the next turn, or if I should keep healing to tank more hits. Combine this with a ridiculously large boss health pool, and you'll start to realize why this mod is bullet hell. To put to scale how unforgiving this boss fight is, I was actually just about to beat the boss fight, and this happened. Oh, nigga! There was no prior warning to this attack, I was given no items, and the rest of my team was on 10 health. Safe to say I'm not ever playing this ever again. Besides that, something else which was nice to see was this mod getting a recent remaster patch, mainly remastering the soundtrack and slightly tweaking the visuals. Overall, it's good to see old mods like this still get some love years after release, something which unfortunately will never happen for the next boss fight. I'm of course talking about the mod The Upper Hand, originally teased as part of Under Event 2024 and released in May 2025. Since then, the entire mod page was wiped from SadBread's GameJolt account following some pretty serious controversies surrounding the Winterer, one of the developers for the mod. I'm not going to go too much in detail about what happened, but if you want to find out yourself, I'll include a link to the Google Doc in the video description. Anyways, drama aside, the mod itself is extremely well designed, and unlike all the other mods I've covered so far, has more gameplay outside of the final encounter, and actually gives you items. A revolutionary concept. Anyways, the entire premise of this mod is based on the idea of Sans' sock becoming a darkener, as the chapter takes place in a dark world created in Sans' bedroom. Before you look at me weirdly, I have no idea where this what if scenario came from, and it seems exclusive to this mod. Weird premise aside, I actually started to like the sock swirled character, and the fact that he speaks like this follows the trend of speech quirks all the secret bosses have had, which just makes sense. Even though you already know this guy is going to become a villain, the lead up to his corruption was still pretty interesting, and the boss fight is nothing short of well paced and creative. You've even got callbacks to Megalovania and Sans in the fight, reminding you that this is still Sans' sock. Apart from that, to stop myself from going too much in detail and turning this into a review about the mod itself, the game had a lot of story building and everything you need in the Deltarune fan game, like cutscenes, a lively dark world, and a shop. For the actual fight itself, all I'm going to say is the boss attacks are really fun with the blue soul, and I like that after a certain amount of attacks, you eventually reach the final attack and beat Andromeda, regardless of how much damage or mercy you accumulate. Something which I think other mods here should take note of. Chaser. Stuff like this is what makes the Upper Hand stand out as a fan-made boss, as it not only has a really interesting premise and boss fight, but an entire interactable section leading up to it, indicative of a fan project that has had lots of passion put into it. After going through the history of all these Deltarune mods, some being better than others in quality, and some having more of an interesting history compared to others, we still have barely scratched the surface regarding the history of community-created content. And if you remember what I said towards the beginning of the video, there's so much more out there to explore. I'm sure you've already been screaming it at your screens right now, but it's the theories. If you want to check out some of the most bizarre fan theories, you can click on the video on screen. And as always, have a good one.